All right, so good morning again. So now let's see, so where we are. So we are in a chapter to study demand and supply, right? So let me quickly review what we have discussed last week. Last week we studied demand, and then so today we are going to study supply. Okay, let me use these slides. These slides kind of summarize what we learned, right? So we have learned, let me write down, so we have learned a few things. We have learned demand, right? And we learned the demand curve. So what is demand? Demand curve essentially tells you the relationship between price and the quantity demanded. What is quantity demanded? Quantity demanded is what you are willing to and able to purchase at a particular price. Right? And then the demand curve will have a lot of demand, essentially says the lower the price, look at here. So this is the price. Here, this is the quantity demanded. Lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded. Right? This is a law of demand. And then we also differentiate between changes demand and changes the quantity demanded. What is changing demand? Just look at this individual, right? So changing demand means the demand curve shifts to the right or shifts to the left. If the curve shifts to the left, means there's a decrease. If the curve shifts to the right, means there's increase in demand, right? And so what's changing quantity demanded? Meaning, so we just stick with this line, or we just move along the line, or move along the demand curve. All right, so that's the difference. And then lastly, what do we study? We studied the factors can cause the demand curve to shift, either move to left or move to the right, right? So we talk about a few things that can cause the demand curve shift, including expectation, including price of related goods, including income, including numbers of buyers, right? So once we study demand, or once we understand demand, and then so we add them together. So we use two individuals to represent many. Okay? And then so we get market demand, right? So we have this simple summation. And because this summation is a simple operation, that's going to preserve all the properties we have or we observe in individual demand. Okay, so this is demand. Now we are going to move to supply. Okay, supply. So all the discussion is going to be quite similar to demand, right? Okay, so start with supply curve. The supply curve shows the quantity supplied at various price, right? But what is the quantity supplied? Similar to quantity demanded. So quantity supplied is a quantity that producers are willing to. There are two things, right? One is willing, the other is able. Able to means essentially just feasible, given their technology. They are willing to provide such things at a particular price. They're willing to means so they are making profit, or they are maximizing their profit, okay, at a particular price. Okay? So this is very similar to quantity demanded. Just remind you, quantity demanded is the quantity that buyers are willing and able to purchase at a particular price. Okay? So now we're talking about supply. Okay, so we are going to use examples to understand supply. Right? So here we have supply schedule. Okay, what is supply schedule? Supply schedule essentially refers to this table. Right? And earlier we talked about demand schedule. Okay, we have a similar table. But now so we are going to look at how quantity supplied change with price of the commodity. And here the commodity is cotton. Right? Now you're going to see, so the price decrease, and what happens? The quantity supplied will decrease as well. Okay? So this is supply schedule. We put those data points. On this diagram or coordinates. what we have on this diagram. Similarly, we have quantity on the horizontal line. We have price on the vertical line. Right? When we put those dots, say for example, these dots represent the first row, right? And these dots represent the last row in our supply schedule. Okay? And if we connect those dots, we are going to have our supply curve. Okay? They just erase everything and make it clear to see. Okay? So let's just highlight 2 points. This point corresponds to the first row. This point corresponds to the last row. Okay? And then now we are going to have a supply curve, and this supply curve is outward sloping. Okay? And this upward sloping represents the law of supply. Okay? The law of supply says as the price rises, the quantity supplied rises. So this part corresponds to law of supply, right? Now, similar to demand, we are going to look at changes in supply and changes in quantity supplied. But start with changes in supply. Okay? So change in supply can be two possible. There can be two possibilities. Either there's increase, or similar there's a decrease. Right. So now, what is considered as an increase in supply? Okay. So the curve shifts to the right. Okay. If the curve shifts to the right, and then we call there's an increase in supply. Now, just remind you, so how we interpreted an increase in demand. Okay, so the way we interpreted increase in demand is, let me just quickly draw a diagram here. So we have a demand curve, and the curve shifts to the right, we say there's increase in demand. And how we understand that, or how we interpret that, there are two ways. One, given the quantity, the individuals willing to pay more. And secondly, given the price, the individual is going to demand more. Right? So this is increase in demand. Now, similarly, so for increase in supply, we have similar interpretation. If price stay at $1, now the supply side or producer is going to willing to supply more, right? Or on the other hand, if you want same amount of goods supplied in the market, right? The supply side is willing to charge lower price, right? Because before they want to charge you $1.20. Now they are going to willing to sell at 3/4. Right? So these two ways to understand why a rightward shift of the supply curve is an increase in supply. Okay, so you should be able to do the reverse analysis. When the curve shifts to the left-hand side, and then so we say there's a decrease in supply. Okay, so you should be able to do that for yourself. Okay. Now, right, to summarize, the curve shifts to the right, we said there's an increase. And if the curve shifts to the left, we said there's a decrease. Right? Now, it's a good time to tell you what is change in quantity supplied. Change in quantity supplied. Okay. That means the supply curve itself stay the same, but we just move along the curve. Okay, what causes changes in quantity supplied? It is caused by the changes in price of the goods, nothing else. But what causes changes in supply? Either it's increasing or it's a decreasing supply. What caused that? So that's what we are going to discuss in the following slides. Okay. So there are several factors can cause a shift in supply. Okay, when I say shift, means the curve shift, and either there's a decrease or the increase. There are 5 factors. So I'm not going to say them one by one because in the following slides, we are going to explain them one by one. Now start with the first one, input price. Okay. If there's a change in input prices, okay, first consider there's a decrease. If there's a decrease in the price of an input, that is going to increase profit and encourage more supply. Okay? Here are examples. What will happen to the number of new businesses if the government reduces the fee and red tape associated with new business license? Okay? To understand that, we need to identify what this fee and the red tapes means, right? And also, we need to understand what supply we are talking about. Actually, here the supply is a supply of new business. Supply, we are talking about new business, right? And here, the input price is what? Is fees and red tape. Okay? So this fee and red tape, why we interpret it as input price for new business is because fee and red tape is considered as transaction costs for you to set up new business. So if this cost reduce, and then it becomes cheaper to set up new business. If nothing else change, then certainly the supply will increase. Okay. On the contrary, if the fee rise, okay, think about due to corruption. Okay. This fee rise, meaning it becomes more costly to set up new business. And then alternatively, the supply will decline. Right? So this is how input price is going to affect the supply. Essentially, because of input price, it's going to determine the profitability. In this particular example, so we are talking about supply of new business. This is the first factor. Okay. Now we can look at another example for this first factor. So we still look at input price. When the price of cotton drops, the supply of blue jeans increase. Why is that? Because cotton is considered the main input for blue jeans. Right? So if the price of cotton drop, the input is cheaper. It's more profitable to produce blue jeans. So that's why the supply of blue jeans increase. Now here I want to remind you a principle we discussed in earlier chapter. It's called ceteris paribus. What is ceteris paribus? So that's a principle we frequently use in economics. Essentially, like you say, we keep everything else fixed, or we keep everything else constant. Okay, why this ceteris paribus principle so important in our discussion here? Now just imagine there are two other things change at the same time when the price of cotton drops. Okay, number one, if there's a change in taste, okay, people feel blue jean is not comfortable or blue jean is not cool anymore. Even though the price of cotton drops, the supply of blue jeans may not necessarily increase. Why is that? It's because of this test is going to affect demand. And this demand is going to affect the profitability of producing blue jeans. Right? So at the end, how the supply of blue jean change is going to be complicated. So that's why we apply this ceteris paribus principle. Meaning when we say the price of cotton drops, we actually assume there's no change in taste, there's no change in other things, nothing. The only thing change is the price of cotton. So that's why we can have sharp prediction says the supply of blue jean will increase. Now, the other possible things can affect the discussion we just had. Okay? So price of cotton drops, but however, if there's a new fabric, its price drop more significantly. Right? This new fabric is a new innovation. It feels like cotton, okay? Or in some sense, it's a perfect substitute for cotton, but it's way more cheaper to produce. If that's the case, so the supply of blue jean will increase substantially. Right? But the supply of blue jean increase not necessarily caused by the price of cotton drop. It probably is caused by the price drop in a fabric that is a perfect substitute for cotton, whose price drop most significantly. Right? So I just use these two examples to highlight the importance of keeping in mind we may want to apply the ceteris paribus principle, meaning everything else hold constant. Right? Okay, so this is the first factor can cause the supply curve shift. Either shift to the right, meaning increase, or shift to the left, meaning decrease. Now we move to the second factor. So now we are going to look at change in the price of related goods or service. So these related things has two natures. Right? It is depending on what type of goods we are talking about. Right? So we must separate between substitute and complements in the production processes. Okay? Okay, so what that means? Maybe we can use examples. Okay? Start with substitute. Think about a farmer who lives in Nebraska, somewhere in Nebraska. Okay? And the farmer has 100 acres of land. Okay? And so these 100 acres of land in a regular season, what these farmers can produce, they can either produce corn or they can produce soybean. Right? So in that sense, the corn and soybean in the production process, they are substitutes. Because this 1 acre of land, they are perfect to produce corn and soybeans. But I understand in reality, so the farmers choose to alternate to reduce the pests, to reduce the cost. Let's just think about economics, right? So in each year, so they have two choices, right? They either produce corn or they can grow soybean. All right. Now, what would happen if the price of corn increase? How would that affect the supply of soybean? Okay. Okay, so the price of corn increase, and then the supply or the quantity supplied will increase. Supply will increase. That's for corn. Now, because of land is limited, so they only have 1 acre of land. So if I or the farmer choose to grow more corn because the price of corn increase, and that just leaves the farmer less land to grow soybean. And toward the end, the supply of soybean will decline. And the reason why the supply of soybean decline is because corn and soybean, they're substitutes. The price of corn increase, and then so the farmer will substitute corn for soybean because corn becomes more profitable. So this is substitute. Right? So now we look at other possible relationship within goods produced, which is complement. Complement means, so when we produce goods A, and we must produce B at the same time. The example is pork processing. When we produce pork, when the farmer slaughter their pigs, and they produce pork, and then so automatically they are going to generate lard in the process, right? So now, if the price of pork increase, just think about in Asia, there's swine flu, African swine flu. There's shortage of pork, and the price of pork increase. How would that affect the supply of lard? So the price of pork increase means the supply of pork will increase. The supply of pork increase automatically leads to larger quantity of lard supplied because the farmer or the meat processing factory, they are going to generate lard automatically in the process of producing pork. Right? Okay, so this is how the related goods, their price change can affect the supply of goods and service we are interested in. Okay? So here, so the key things is we need to differentiate their relationship, whether it's a substitute or a complement. So this substitution and complementarity is similar, but not the same as in the demand side. Okay, just remind you how the demand side looks like. What is substitute in demand side? Okay, so we substitute corns for not soybean, right? So probably typically you substitute corn for maybe rice, right? But there, so the substitution lies in the natural consumption. But here, so we talk about corn is a substitute for soybean that's in the natural production. So this substitute. In terms of complement, so here, so complement means when you produce A, you must produce B at the same time. But in the consumer side or in demand side, when we say complement, means when we consume A, we must consume B at the same time. Think about shoes. Think about peanut butter versus bread. Think about cars versus gasoline. All right, so this is the second factor can cause a change in supply. Now we go to the third factor, which is change in technology. Okay? This background picture shows, right? So in the United States, in late 1900 and early 20th century, So the country experienced dramatic technology progress in agriculture sector. Okay? And actually, eventually, the huge amount of population move away from agriculture sector. Like in the earlier 20th century, it has been estimated between 60 to 80% of the population works in agriculture sector. Now these days, so we only have around 2% of the population who are managing the same amount of land or who are producing much larger amount, much larger quantity of food using similar amount of land. What is behind that? It's technology, right? So in general, technology makes seller to willing to offer more at a given price or sell their quantity at lower price. Right? This is because technological innovation lowers costs and increase supply. Okay? So there are plenty of examples. Think about the TV, think about cell phone, think about computer. Right? So the supply increase, price decrease. What's behind that? It's because technological innovation lowers the cost of producing a regular smartphone. There. Now we go to, this is the third factor. No, so fourth maybe, fourth factor. Now, expectation is going to affect supply as well. Okay? So here are examples. If the producer, they're expecting a higher price for goods in the future. And then, so what these producers are going to do? So the producer, they are going to hold on the supply. They're going to store the goods. And why they want to do that? Because by holding on the supply and increase the supply in the future, they are going to make more profit because the price of their goods and service is going to bring higher profit in the future due to higher price in the future. So this is quite opposite to the expectation on demand, right? So in earlier, so if everyone expect the price of a goods and the service will be higher in the future, what happened to the demand? In the demand side, they are going to increase demand to avoid paying higher price in the future. But now when we move to supply side, if everyone expecting higher price in the future, and then the supplier or supply side will hold on the supply to get higher profit in the future. Right. In general, sellers will adjust their current offering in anticipation of direction of future prices in order to obtain the highest possible price. In reality, we call this hoarding, right? So the sellers may hoard the stock to make higher profit. So this probably has happened in earlier this year. So you probably heard about from the news, people hoarding the face mask to sell for higher price. Okay, but fortunately, so these face masks, or in general, personal protection equipment, people will consider this is critical. This is a matter to national security and the government regulate. Right? And then no one is allowed, or if you hoard those stuff and sell that on either on eBay or Amazon, it become illegal. Right, so just give example. So now, another example, changes in expectation. So windmill production increase as producer expects sales and the profitability to increase. Right? And what can cause the sales and the profitability to increase in the future? It could be people cares about climate change. Could be a better technology in the future. Right? So this is how expectation affect the supply. Right. Now, another example I want to show you is how change in expectation can affect supply. So this example happened in 2017. Okay, so if you remember that well, so I guess most of you in 2017, you're still in high school. As in 2017, there's an interesting phenomenon happens in the market. There's a one small toy suddenly becomes popular. And we can see from this chart on the right-hand side, right? So this is a total sale of toys, right? From 0 to 100%, 0 to 100%. And at the beginning of 2017, there's no such thing as called a fidget spinner yet. But around February until end of May, this fidget spinner suddenly becomes widely popular. And its peak time, its sales counts for over 20% of the total toys and games sold online. That's huge, right? And these change in expectation or these changes in test actually cause a huge shift in supply. And this shift in supply essentially reflects by this picture. Towards the end, the supplier, they move their production toward these new toys. Yeah, so this is a perfect example. The lessons of fidget spinner. The big retailers, usually they are going to plan the inventory as much as 18 months ahead of peak season, such as summers or Christmas. If something so popular or so rival happens or show up, and typically those big retailers, they may not have the ability to swiftly change the supply. Right, that's a lesson. All right, the last factor can cause change in supply is changes number of producers. Okay? As producers enter and exit the market, the overall supply will change. Now we need to differentiate between entry and exit. Entry means there are more sellers or suppliers in the market. That's going to increase supply. You may be wondering why we are seeing higher entry. It must be the case people feel, oh, this is more profitable. On the other hand, exit implies fewer sellers, decrease in supply. And similarly, this must have been the case. People find out, oh, so this market is not profitable anymore, so we better exit to avoid losses. Right. Here, example. As more firms enter the solar installation market, the number of solar installation available for sales increase. And another example in reality is as more firms enter the smartphone market, the number of smartphones sold or available for sale will increase. And alternatively, consequently, so that's going to reduce the price to drop. But we will pick up that later when we talk about equilibrium. Now we have looked at 5 different factors can cause change in supply. To finish this part or to wrap up this part, okay, so we are going to look at individual supply versus market supply. Okay. Similarly, so we started with individual. Look at Mr. Silva. Right. And so here, so we have his supply, price, and the quantity. This follows the law of demand, and this is the increasing curve. And also, this supply is going to affect by 5 factors we just talked about. Right? Say, for example, if the price of corn increase, the supply of cotton will decrease because the farmer is going to substitute corn for cotton. Okay, because corn becomes more profitable to grow. Right? Or if there is a new technology that's going to boost up the production of cotton, and then that's going to lead to an increase in supply. Right? So this is individual. Now, similarly, we look at Mr. Liu. Okay? And then Mr. Liu's supply curve is similar to Mr. Silva's supply curve. And here, so we use two individuals to represent many. Right? Now, in the market, we have so many similar suppliers. They're competing with each other. Okay? And then, so we take them together, we aggregate them together, we get market supply curve. So this market supply curve preserve law of demand, preserve those properties we just discussed, meaning they are going to respond to different change, including price, including expectation, including technology, so on and so forth. All right. So now, as usual, we are going to take a 5 minutes break. And then, so we move to equilibrium.